Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Vintage Mike Tales. Thank you for joining me on this journey of love, passion, and healing. This is the story of Charles and Mellissa, two hearts scarred by life, yet drawn together by an irresistible connection. Let yourself feel every heartbeat, every touch, and every whispered word between them. Now let's begin. Detroit nights always felt colder to Charles George. Even from the tinted windows of his limousine, the city was a reminder of how the world never really forgave him for surviving. Skyscrapers lit the skyline, and neon signs flickered across streets buzzing with life. But in Charles's chest there was only the dull ache of absence, connection, love, companionship, things his fortune could never buy. He touched the scar running from the corner of his eye to his jawline, a rough reminder of the accident that took his father when he was 12. The scar had carved a new name for him: Scarface, Beast, Monster. He learned early that people's eyes didn't lie. Even when their mouths smiled politely, their gazes flinched. Wealth had come later, a shrewd mind, relentless drive, and his father's unfinished business. Empire had turned him into one of Detroit's richest men before 40. Yet behind the iron gates of his mansion, behind glass offices overlooking the city, he remained a prisoner of his own reflection. Every woman who came close eventually revealed the truth: interest in his bank account, not his heart. So he stopped trying. Better to be feared than to be used. Mellissa Jeffrey adjusted her glasses nervously as she stared at her reflection in the restroom, mirror of Jefferson Towers, the headquarters of George Enterprises. Her long brown hair fell in waves around her face, softening her sharp cheekbones. On the outside, she looked like a polished professional. Fitted blazer, pencil skirt, heels that clicked with confidence, but inside her stomach twisted. The presentation today could change her career. George Enterprises was one of the biggest clients her firm had ever pursued. But what haunted her wasn't the numbers or the strategy. It was her voice. Her stutter, the flaw that shadowed her since childhood, had ruined more than one opportunity. In school, kids mimicked her broken syllables. In college, professors hurried her along, embarrassed for her. And in her dating life, men pretended patience until their irritation slipped out. Mellissa had become good at hiding behind emails and reports, letting her written words speak louder than her tongue. But today she had to stand before Charles George, himself, a man infamous for his coldness, and pitch face to face. Her palms dampened. Please God, not today. Not in front of him. The conference room was wide, sleek, lined with glass walls that framed the city's horizon. At the head of the table sat Charles, flanked by silent executives who seemed more like guards than colleagues. His presence was magnetic, commanding, but also unsettling. The scar across his face caught the light, and Mellissa saw what others must have seen: intimidation, danger. But then his eyes met hers, blue sharp but not unkind. For the briefest second, her heart skipped. "Mr. George," she began, her voice catching on the syllable. Her throat tightened as heat rose to her cheeks. She wanted to melt into the carpet. Charles tilted his head slightly, not in mockery but in curiosity. His gaze didn't flinch, didn't narrow. He simply waited. "Take your time," he said, voice deep, steady, unexpectedly gentle. That kindness steadied her. She exhaled slowly, opened her slides, and pushed through. Though her words stumbled at times, her knowledge, her passion, her vision for George Enterprises' new brand strategy shone through. She saw nods from the executives, but more importantly, she saw Charles watching her, not with pity, not with disdain, but with something softer. When she finished, silence hung in the room. Mellissa gripped her folder, bracing for the polite dismissal. Instead, Charles leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "You've given me the first honest presentation I've heard in years," he said. His voice held weight, the kind that silenced the room. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Her chest swelled, surprise tears threatening. She nodded mutely. The meeting ended with formalities. But as Mellissa packed her things, Charles's voice stopped her. "Miss Jeffrey." She turned. "Dinner. Tonight. My penthouse. 8. It wasn't a request. Yet there was no arrogance in his tone. It was as if he was offering something rare: his time, his trust. Her instincts screamed to decline. She hated dinners, hated the pressure of constant speech. But something in his gaze, that same softness beneath the scarred exterior, made her whisper, yes. Charles rarely invited anyone into his private world. His penthouse, perched above the city, was less a home and more a sanctuary. Yet as he waited for Mellissa that evening, pacing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, he felt restless. Why her? Why had he, for the first time in years, reached out? Because when she stuttered, she didn't look ashamed of him. Because she hadn't recoiled at his scars. Because for one trembling hour, she had been as exposed as he had been his entire life. When the doorbell chimed, his heart hammered in a way he hadn't felt since boyhood. Mellissa stepped inside, wrapped in a navy dress that traced her curves, yet held elegance. She looked around, wide-eyed at the luxury. But when her gaze landed on him, she didn't falter. "Be beautiful view," she said softly, gesturing to the skyline. Charles nodded, eyes never leaving her. "Not as beautiful as you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He saw her cheeks flush, her lips part in surprise. He braced for awkward silence. Instead, Mellissa smiled, small, shy, but genuine. Thank you." They dined over wine and candlelight, conversation flowing between pauses and silences that, oddly, didn't feel uncomfortable. Charles confessed he rarely did this, shared meals, invited company. Mellissa admitted she feared every word slipping from her tongue. "You think your stutter makes you weak," Charles said, his gaze piercing but tender. "But it makes you real. I'd rather hear your imperfect words than 1,000 rehearsed lies." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her. "And you," she whispered, eyes flicking to his scar, "think this makes you less, but it doesn't. It makes you unforgettable." For a moment, silence wrapped them like a cocoon. The city lights glowed behind them, but neither looked away from the other. Charles reached across the table, his large hand hesitating near hers. Melissa's fingers trembled, then closed the distance, resting lightly atop his. Electricity surged through the contact. They didn't kiss, not yet, but the promise hung in the air, thick with longing. Later that night, as Mellissa left, Charles walked her to the door. The air between them was charged, their breaths shallow. "I don't know why I asked you here," he admitted, his voice low. "I don't do this." "Neither do I," Mellissa whispered, her stammer softened by the emotion in her tone. Their eyes locked again, heat and vulnerability colliding. He wanted to kiss her, but fear of rejection chained him. She wanted to lean in, but fear of being laughed at held her back. So they lingered, suspended in a moment neither wanted to end. "Good night, Miss Jeffrey," Charles said finally, his voice husky. "Good night, Mr. George," she replied, her lips curving in the faintest smile. When the door closed, both leaned against opposite sides, he against the wood, she against the hallway wall, hearts racing, bodies aching, souls whispering the same truth. Something had begun. The following morning, Mellissa sat at her desk, staring at the untouched coffee on the corner. She should have been drafting emails, reviewing proposals, anything but replaying last night over and over. The dinner, the candlelight, the way Charles's voice had softened just for her, the way his hand had lingered, almost trembling, before finally brushing hers. She closed her eyes, biting her lip. For a man so feared, so infamous, Charles had looked almost fragile, as if she, of all people, could shatter him with a single rejection. And wasn't that the strangest thing? That she, the woman who stumbled over half her sentences, could make someone like Charles George hesitate. Her phone buzzed. "An unknown number," she answered, pulse quickening. "Mellissa," the voice rumbled, low, familiar, commanding. Her breath caught. "Mr. George?" A pause. Then softly, "Charles." "Call me Charles." She swallowed, heat rising to her cheeks. "Charles." "I enjoyed our dinner," he said, "but I regret one thing." Her fingers tightened around the phone. What's that? That I let you walk away without knowing how your lips taste?" Her breath hitched. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, without thinking, she whispered, "You don't have to regret it." Charles paced his penthouse, restless energy sparking through him. When Mellissa agreed to return that night, he felt both exhilarated and terrified. He had never allowed himself this much vulnerability, not with anyone. Women had touched his body before, but never his soul. And Mellissa, her stutter, her courage, her eyes that didn't flinch. She reached into places he'd buried long ago. The knock at the door snapped him from his thoughts. He opened it, and there she was, bathed in the golden glow of the hallway light. A deep burgundy dress clung to her body, elegant yet daring. Her hair spilled over her shoulders, and her almond brown eyes looked uncertain yet determined. "Come in," he said, voice rougher than intended. The air between them was taut, buzzing. They didn't bother with small talk. Instead, Charles poured wine, and they stood by the window overlooking Detroit's skyline. "You don't scare me," Mellissa said suddenly, her voice quiet but steady. Charles froze. Slowly, he turned to her. "Everyone says that, before they run." "I'm not everyone," she replied, meeting his gaze. "And you don't scare me." His chest tightened, a knot unraveling inside him. Before he could stop himself, he reached up, cupping her cheek. Her skin was soft, her breath trembling against his palm. "Mellissa," he murmured, voice almost breaking. And then, finally, he kissed her. The kiss began tentative, his lips brushing hers like a question, hers answering with hesitant warmth. But within seconds it deepened. Years of repression, of loneliness poured into it. Charles's hand slid into her hair, pulling her closer. Mellissa moaned softly, the sound vibrating against his mouth, sending heat straight through him. Her lips parted, inviting him in. His tongue swept against hers, hungry, searching, tasting the sweetness he'd dreamed of since their first meeting. She clutched his shirt, her stuttered breaths breaking between kisses. "Charles!" she gasped, her voice trembling but raw with desire. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Do you want this?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. God, yes. That was all he needed. Clothes became obstacles. His jacket slid to the floor. Her dress slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. He traced the curve of her waist, the swell of her hips, marveling at how real she felt in his arms. She wasn't afraid to touch him. Her hands roamed across his chest, his shoulders, his scarred jawline. When her fingers lingered over the scar, his body stiffened. Instinct screamed to pull away. But Mellissa leaned in, kissing the rough line of his face with reverence. "You're beautiful," she murmured against his skin. The words nearly undid him. No woman had ever kissed his scar, let alone called him beautiful. A guttural sound tore from his throat as he lifted her, carrying her toward the bedroom. The bed welcomed them with a softness that contrasted the urgency of their movements. He laid her down gently, as though she were fragile porcelain, though every part of him screamed to devour her. She pulled him down instead, her nails digging into his back. "Don't hold back," she whispered. "Not with me." Their mouths met again, fevered, hungry. His hands roamed her body, exploring every curve, every inch of soft skin. When his lips trailed down her throat, she arched beneath him, gasping his name in broken syllables. Her vulnerability ignited him. Each stammer, each gasp, each tremor was a reminder she wasn't performing. She was surrendering. He kissed down her chest, his mouth finding her breast, and she moaned openly, no longer caring if her voice faltered. Her fingers tangled in his hair, urging him on. "Charles, please." Her plea shattered the last of his restraint. He worshipped her with lips, tongue, and hands until she writhed, her body arching, her cries filling the room. When he finally entered her, it wasn't just sex, it was an unveiling. Two broken souls laying bare everything they feared, everything they craved. His thrusts were deep, reverent, his forehead pressed to hers as if afraid to lose the connection. She clung to him, her stuttered whispers spilling freely. I've never felt this, neither have I," he groaned, his voice ragged. Their rhythm built, bodies slick with sweat, hearts pounding in unison. The city outside disappeared. Time itself seemed to collapse until only they remained, lost in the fire of each other. When release finally consumed them, it was not just physical, it was emotional, almost spiritual. Charles buried his face against her neck, shuddering, while Melissa's nails raked lightly down his back, her voice breaking with sobbed moans. They collapsed together, breathless, tangled in sheets and limbs. For a while, silence reigned. The only sound was their uneven breathing, the steady thrum of their hearts. Charles stared at the ceiling, afraid to look at her, afraid the spell would break and she'd see him for what he was. Then Mellissa shifted, resting her head on his chest. "Don't hide from me," she whispered. His throat tightened. Slowly, he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. But morning light is cruel. Mellissa woke before dawn, the reality of what had happened settling over her like a heavy cloak. She turned, watching Charles sleep beside her. The scarred yet strong lines of his face, the vulnerability in his softened features, it stirred something deep inside her. And yet fear gnawed at her. What if he only wanted her body? What if, once the glow faded, he realized she wasn't enough, that her stutter made her unworthy of the world he lived in? Quietly, she slipped from the bed, gathering her clothes. She pressed a trembling kiss to his shoulder before leaving, tears stinging her eyes. Charles stirred as the door clicked shut. He reached out instinctively, finding only cold sheets. His chest tightened. Of course she left. They always left. But this time the emptiness hurt worse than ever before. Charles hadn't slept much since Mellissa walked out of his bed. He replayed the night over and over, the way her lips trembled beneath his, the way she whispered his name, the way she had kissed his scar without hesitation. It had been real. He knew it. Yet the empty sheets in the morning felt like confirmation of his worst fear. She'd seen him fully and decided he wasn't enough, but still, she had kissed him goodbye. He sat in his office the following day, staring at a contract without seeing a word of it. Finally, unable to bear the silence, he did something he never did. He picked up a pen and wrote. Just a few lines, his handwriting sharp, almost angry. "You are the first person who made me feel alive again. I don't know if you'll come back, but if you do, I'll be waiting." He sent the note with flowers, white lilies, not roses, because roses felt like a performance. Lilies were honest. When Mellissa opened the door to the delivery, her breath caught. The flowers were delicate, fragrant, the note folded neatly between them. She read the words once, twice, 3 times, her chest tightening. No man had ever written her something so bare, so vulnerable. They usually tried to impress her with money, promises, or flattery. But Charles had given her his fear, his truth. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. "Mellissa." His voice was low, urgent, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Try," she started, her stutter thick with nerves. She closed her eyes, forced herself to breathe. "I shouldn't have left." Silence stretched, then his breath rushed out. "Then come back." That night she did. When the elevator opened to his penthouse, Charles was already there, waiting. He hadn't changed into a suit, hadn't dressed to impress. He wore only a black shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes burning with something primal. Mellissa barely stepped through the door before he pulled her into his arms. Their mouths collided in a kiss that wasn't tentative like the first. It was desperate, urgent, raw. His hands gripped her waist, her back, pulling her flush against him as if afraid she'd vanish again. "Don't leave me this time," he growled against her lips. "I won't," she gasped, clinging to him. "I promise." This time there was no slow unraveling. He lifted her, pressing her against the wall, his mouth devouring hers. She wrapped her legs around his waist, moaning as his hands roamed with hunger. Every kiss, every touch carried weeks of loneliness, years of repression. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, tugging his shirt over his head. Her lips found his scar again, and he shuddered, clutching her tighter. "You don't have to hide from me," she whispered, breath hot against his skin. The words broke something inside him. He carried her to the bed, laying her down only long enough to strip the rest of her clothes away. Then he was over her, inside her, filling her with a fierce urgency that made them both cry out. Their bodies moved in frantic rhythm, the bed shaking beneath them. Mellissa moaned his name between stutters, gasping, clawing at his back. Charles buried his face in her neck, his thrusts deep, his voice raw. "You're mine," he groaned. "Do you understand? You're mine." "Yes," she cried, her voice breaking but strong. "I'm yours, always." Their release came hard and fast, waves crashing, leaving them breathless and trembling in each other's arms. And for the first time, Charles didn't feel the emptiness afterward. He felt whole. Weeks later, the invitation arrived. George Enterprises was hosting a corporate gala, one of Detroit's grandest annual events. Charles usually attended alone, his presence enough to silence gossip and stir whispers. But this year he asked Mellissa to join him. She hesitated at first. Public speaking was her nightmare. What if she stuttered in front of everyone? What if they mocked her? But when she saw the quiet fear in Charles's eyes, that she might be too ashamed to be seen with him, she said yes. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and gowns. Laughter and music swirled like perfume. But when Charles entered with Mellissa on his arm, the air shifted. Conversations hushed, eyes darted, whispers spread, There's the beast, and who's the woman? She's pretty. Shame about the stutter. Mellissa felt the sting of the words, but she straightened her back, her fingers tightening around Charles's hand. He noticed the slight tremor, the flicker of panic in her eyes. He bent his head close. "They don't matter," he whispered. "Only you do." Her throat tightened. She nodded, clinging to him. Throughout the night, people tried to mask their stares, but Mellissa caught the smirks, the sidelong glances. When introduced, she stumbled over her words, her stutter tripping in the silence that followed. A few people looked away, hiding polite grimaces. Her cheeks burned, but then she felt Charles's thumb rub soothing circles against her hand, grounding her. "She's the bravest woman in this room," Charles said suddenly, his voice carrying over the music. Heads turned. "She's more honest than all of you combined." Gasps rippled. Mellissa froze, her heart hammering. He had just defended her, publicly, unapologetically. Her eyes welled with tears. She squeezed his hand, her lips curving in a trembling smile. Later that night, after they escaped the glittering crowd, Mellissa followed Charles into his mansion, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Without a word, she pushed him against the door, kissing him fiercely. "For what you said tonight," she whispered against his lips, "I'll never forget it." His eyes burned. "You're worth every word, every battle." They didn't make it to the bedroom. Clothes were torn away in the hallway, kisses frantic, bodies colliding with desperate need. She straddled him on the leather couch, his hands gripping her thighs, his mouth worshipping her skin. This time their lovemaking was wild, unrestrained, like fire that couldn't be contained. Every thrust, every moan, every cry echoed with triumph, against the world, against shame, against the loneliness that once chained them. When they collapsed together afterward, sweat slick and panting, Mellissa whispered the truth she had been holding back. "I love you, Charles." He froze, staring at her. His scarred face, his hardened heart, his entire being trembled at those words. No one had ever said them, not without condition, not without pity. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the tears sliding down her cheek. "And I love you, Mellissa, more than I ever thought I could." The weeks following the gala were unlike anything Mellissa had ever experienced. Everywhere she went with Charles, people whispered, some in awe, some in cruel amusement, others in open curiosity. She expected it to break her, to reduce her to the girl, who once hid in bathroom stalls rather than risk stuttering in front of classmates. But instead she stood taller, because Charles was always beside her, his hand steady at the small of her back, his presence a shield, his words when necessary a sword. And with each day her own voice grew stronger, not less imperfect, not magically fluent but braver. She even started attending a small speech support group at his urging, and though at first she shook with nerves, Charles sat quietly in the back of the room, his scarred face unashamed, silently reminding her that flaws could be beautiful. In turn, Mellissa coaxed Charles into places he once avoided, parks, cafes, even crowded theaters. When strangers stared, she would squeeze his hand, whisper, "Let them look. You're mine." And every time she said it, the boy inside him who once flinched at his reflection learned to breathe again. One quiet evening, Charles sat with Mellissa on the balcony of his penthouse, Detroit's skyline glittering beneath them. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. "I used to think," he said softly, "that I would live and die alone, that no one could ever see past this." He traced his scar absently. Mellissa lifted her head, her brown eyes shimmering. "I don't just see past it, Charles. I see through it. To the man you've always been." His throat tightened. "And what do you see?" Her hand cupped his cheek, thumb brushing along the rough line of his scar. "A man who protects, who loves fiercely, who deserves to be loved back without conditions. My man." Emotion surged so hard he almost couldn't breathe. He stood abruptly, pacing, hands raking through his hair. "Mellissa, I can't lose you. Do you understand? I've lost too much already. If you ever left..." She rose and walked to him, her hand slipping into his. Her stutter came thick with emotion, but she didn't hide it. "I'm not going anywhere. You're my home now." That broke him. He dropped to one knee right there on the balcony, the city lights glowing like stars around them. From his pocket he pulled a velvet box, snapping it open to reveal a ring that glittered with understated elegance. "Mellissa Jeffrey," he said, his voice shaking though his gaze was steady. "You healed a heart I thought was beyond saving. You taught me love isn't about perfection. It's about acceptance. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her stutter faltered on the word. But her conviction did not. Yes, my God, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her, it was with the reverence of a man kissing salvation itself. The wedding was not the grand spectacle the city expected. Charles could have filled cathedrals, bought gowns dripping in diamonds, fed thousands, but he didn't want that. He wanted real. So beneath an arch of white lilies in a garden outside the city, with only a small circle of friends and colleagues, they spoke vows written from their scars and their healing. Mellissa, her voice trembling but proud, said, "I once thought my voice was broken. That love wasn't for someone like me. But you showed me that every stutter still carries meaning. Every word is still worthy. You are my strength, my shelter, my forever." Charles, with tears streaking down his scarred cheek, replied, "I once thought my face was a curse, that I was meant to be feared, not loved. But you kissed what I hated most and called it beautiful. You are my courage, my truth, my always." When he kissed his bride, the applause was small, but the moment felt infinite. For once neither of them heard whispers, only love. That night, as husband and wife, their lovemaking carried a new weight. It was slow, tender, reverent, not fueled by desperation or fear, but by a deep knowing that they belonged wholly to each other. Charles undressed Mellissa with trembling hands, his eyes devouring her like she was art made just for him. She guided his hands to her stuttering lips. "Say it again," she whispered. "You're beautiful," he breathed. "Every inch of you, every word, every sound." She smiled through her tears, pulling him down into a kiss that melted the last of their walls. Their bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, not wild but deliberate, savoring every sigh, every gasp, every whispered promise. When Mellissa kissed his scar again, he didn't flinch. He moaned, shuddering, finally letting himself believe he was desired, fully, deeply, forever. And when her stutter spilled into moaned confessions of love, he held her tighter, whispering, "Never hide from me. Not your voice, not your soul." Their release came like a quiet storm, overwhelming but peaceful, binding them in a union deeper than flesh. Afterward, wrapped in sheets in each other, Mellissa traced patterns on his chest. "Do you still think you're a beast?" Charles kissed her forehead, his eyes closing with contentment. "No, not anymore, because you saw the man inside the beast and loved him anyway." After the quiet intimacy of their wedding night, Charles held Mellissa in his arms, the city lights behind them fading into shadows. "Do you want to see the stars?" he asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. She nodded, heart racing. He led her to the balcony, where the moon hung full and luminous over Detroit, and the sky was scattered with stars, glittering like their own private galaxy. "Beautiful," Mellissa whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Not as beautiful as you," he murmured. The chill of the night air only heightened the heat between them. Their lips met again, slow and searching, but soon the kiss deepened, hungry and desperate. His hands traced her curves, exploring the familiar terrain of her body with reverence and fire. She gasped, her stutter spilling into moans as the moonlight bathed them in silver. Charles lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the railing with their bodies fused together. Every touch, every thrust, was a silent declaration. Love, desire and ownership intertwined. The wind whispered around them, carrying their cries into the night, the stars and moon bearing witness to their passion. They moved together until breath and skin burned, until the night itself seemed to bend around their pleasure. Finally, exhausted and trembling, they collapsed against each other. Hearts pounding, bodies entwined. The next morning, Charles revealed the second part of their celebration. "Pack lightly," he said, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "I have a surprise." Within hours, they were on a private plane, soaring over turquoise waters toward a secluded island. The world below seemed to disappear, leaving only them and the promise of untouched paradise. Their cottage was built from natural rocks, with walls of glass that framed the ocean horizon. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers. Inside, the space was intimate yet luxurious, just enough room for them to sink into each other without interruption. And then he led her to the waterfall. Crystal water tumbled down smooth stones, collecting into a pool that glimmered like liquid diamonds under the sun. They stepped in together, letting the water cascade over their bodies. Charles pressed her against the rocks, mouth tracing the curve of her neck, hands gliding over the wet sheen of her skin. Mellissa moaned, the sound lost in the rush of the waterfall, her stutter interwoven with gasps of pleasure. He lifted her, carrying her into the pool, their bodies slick and sliding together. The water could not cool the heat between them. Lips met, tongues entwined, hands explored, every touch heightened by the soft spray, the sound of falling water, and the sensation of freedom that only this private paradise could provide. They made love beneath the waterfall, the water wrapping around them like silk, bodies moving in a rhythm older than time, raw and unrestrained, yet tender. The rocks beneath them pressed in, grounding the intensity, and the open sky above allowed them to feel infinite, boundless and completely unafraid of the world. When they finally collapsed into the pool, soaked, shivering and laughing through their exhaustion, Charles pulled her into his chest. "You are everything," he whispered, his lips brushing her temple. "And you are mine," Mellissa replied, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. They stayed there for hours, wrapped in each other. The waterfall and the island a private witness to the depth of their love, body, heart and soul. For Charles and Mellissa, none of the whispers mattered anymore. They had found each other in the ruins of their fears, stitched their wounds with love, and built something stronger than perfection. Together they were unbreakable. And in the quiet of their honeymoon night, as husband and wife, they both finally understood. Scars don't make you less. They make you unforgettable. And that concludes the story of Charles and Mellissa. Their journey reminds us that true love sees beyond scars, beyond fears and beyond imperfections. I hope their passion, courage, and connection touched your heart as deeply as it did mine. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Vintage Mike Tales for more tales of love, passion, and healing. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love.